The Gilded Illusion. Sophia Navarro still remembered the moment she fell in love with Damian Richardson. It wasn't when he pulled up in his sleek Italian sports car outside the small library where she worked. It wasn't during their first date, at a restaurant where a single meal cost more than her weekly grocery budget. It was later that evening, when they walked along the riverfront and he listened, truly listened, as she spoke about her dreams of opening a children's bookstore. "Someday. Your passion is beautiful," he had said, his eyes reflecting the city lights. "It's refreshing to meet someone who cares about something beyond themselves." Back then, Damian had seemed genuine, a successful investment banker who, despite his wealth, appeared grounded. Sophia, the daughter of Filipino immigrants who had worked tirelessly to give her an education, found herself drawn to his ambition and what she perceived as his appreciation for her different perspective. Their courtship was a whirlwind. Within 6 months, he proposed with a ring that made her co-workers gasp. Within a year, they were married in a ceremony that, while lavish by her standards, was considered tastefully restrained by his friends. "You've brought something real into my life," Damian whispered during their first dance. Sophia believed him, even as she noticed his mother's tight smile and his colleagues' evaluating glances. The first 3 years were a delicate balance. Sophia continued working at the library while pursuing her business degree online. Damian's career at Meridian Capital ascended rapidly, bringing invitations to exclusive events and memberships at clubs where the entry fees alone could fund her dream bookstore several times over. "You should quit that job," he suggested one evening as she rushed to change for a dinner with his potential clients. "It doesn't reflect our lifestyle." "Our lifestyle?" she questioned, pausing with one earring in place. "I love my work, Damian." He sighed with practiced patience. "I understand, but perception matters in my world. The wife of Meridian's youngest partner reading stories to children doesn't exactly project the image we need." The "we" became increasingly about his world, his ambitions. The charm that had initially drawn her, his interest in her different background, began to erode, replaced by subtle corrections. "Perhaps don't mention your father's construction work tonight," he suggested before a charity gala. "Try not to use Tagalog expressions around the Blakemores," he advised before hosting his boss for dinner. Each suggestion carried the same unspoken message. "You are not quite enough as you are." By their 5th anniversary, Damian had been promoted to senior partner. They moved from their comfortable downtown apartment to an estate in Westlake Hills, where homes were referred to as properties, and neighbors were rarely seen but often discussed. Their new home was a masterpiece of marble and glass with views that stretched over the city. It came with a staff, a housekeeper, a gardener, and a personal chef. Sophia found herself with neither her library job, which Damian had convinced her to leave, nor the intimate connection they once shared. "Isn't this everything we wanted?" Damian asked one evening, finding her alone on their expansive terrace. Sophia looked at him, his tailored suit, his confidence, the slight hardening around his eyes that hadn't been there when they met. "Is it what you wanted, Damian? Because lately I feel like I'm just part of the decor." His expression flickered with something, perhaps recognition, perhaps annoyance. "Don't be dramatic, Sophia. You have everything most people dream of, except the bookstore, except feeling like I matter beyond being your wife." Damian's laugh was gentle but dismissive. "That little bookstore fantasy. Sophia, you're the wife of one of the most influential financiers in the city. You don't need to sell children's books to be fulfilled." She didn't argue further. The distance between them had grown too vast for words to bridge. Instead, she watched as Damian transformed from the man who had once valued her differences into someone who seemed determined to erase them. Within a year, their conversations had reduced to schedules and social obligations. Sophia maintained her smile at events, stood by his side in photographs, and became increasingly invisible to herself. The whispers at parties didn't escape her. Notice how Damian could have done better, how surprising it was that he had married someone so ordinary. When she finally completed her business degree, Damian acknowledged it with an expensive watch rather than the support for her bookstore she had hoped for. Something befitting your new status, he said, as though her education was merely another accessory to enhance their image. That night, as Sophia looked at her reflection, adorned in jewelry that felt heavy, wearing a designer dress that never quite felt like her own, she finally recognized the truth. The gilded life Damien had created wasn't a home but a cage, and she was slowly forgetting how to fly. Shattered dreams. The end came not with a bang, but with a whisper. On a Tuesday evening in autumn, Sophia sat alone at their immaculate dining table, the chef's perfectly prepared meal growing cold before her. Damien had called. Another late meeting, another important client. It had become so routine that she barely felt disappointment anymore. What she did feel, however, was the weight of the envelope in her hands. Earlier that day, she had received approval for a small business loan, one she had applied for secretly using her maiden name and her personal savings as collateral. The modest sum would be enough to lease a small storefront in her old neighborhood, to begin building the children's bookstore she had dreamed of for so long. When Damien finally returned home near midnight, loosening his tie as he walked through the door, Sophia was waiting in the living room, the envelope on the coffee table between them. "I've decided to open my bookstore," she said simply. Damien's laugh was immediate and dismissive. "Sophia, we've discussed this fantasy of yours. It's charming, but hardly practical." "It's not a fantasy to me," she replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I've secured funding, I've found a location." His expression shifted from amusement to disbelief. "You did what? Without consulting me? My name, my reputation is attached to everything you do." "That's the problem, isn't it?" Sophia said, the realization crystallizing as she spoke. "I'm just an extension of you now, not a partner." The argument that followed unraveled years of carefully maintained pretense. Damien's true feelings emerged like poison from a wound. How her background embarrassed him, how he had elevated her, how her gratitude should be unending. "I gave you everything," he said, gesturing around their opulent home. "Except respect," Sophia replied quietly. "You gave me everything except that." The divorce proceedings lasted 3 months. Damien's legal team was ruthless, painting Sophia as a gold digger despite the modest settlement she requested. She asked only for enough to secure her business and a small apartment, a request that seemed to infuriate Damien more than if she had demanded half his fortune. "You're making a mistake," he told her outside the courtroom on the final day. "You'll come crawling back when you realize what you've thrown away." Sophia simply shook her head. "The mistake was forgetting who I am. I won't make it again." She left with less than she had hoped, but more freedom than she had felt in years. The bookstore became her salvation, a small, sunlit space with walls she painted herself in colors Damien would have deemed unsophisticated. She named it Phoenix Pages, a private acknowledgement of her own rebirth. The first months were harder than she had anticipated. Damien's influence in the city ran deep, and subtle obstacles appeared in her path. Loan terms suddenly changed, suppliers became mysteriously unavailable, potential business partners backed away with vague excuses. It was during this struggle that Julian Hayes entered her life. He came to Phoenix Pages on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, seeking a gift for his niece's birthday. Tall and thoughtful, with glasses that kept sliding down his nose as he browsed, Julian was a landscape architect whose designs focused on creating accessible green spaces in underserved communities. "You've created something special here," he said, gesturing to the reading nooks and the hand-painted mural of a world map on the back wall. "It feels like a place where stories can breathe." His genuine appreciation touched something in Sophia that had been dormant for too long. Over the following weeks he returned, sometimes for books, sometimes bringing coffee and pastries, always with conversations that stretched beyond superficial pleasantries. Julian listened when she spoke about her struggles with the business, offered practical advice without condescension, and shared his own challenges balancing artistic vision with commercial viability in his work. Unlike Damien, he saw her determination not as stubbornness to overcome, but as strength to admire. 6 months after opening Phoenix Pages, Sophia hosted her first community reading event. The small store was packed with children and parents from the neighborhood, the atmosphere alive with excitement. In the back of the room, she spotted Julian, his smile warm with pride. The event was covered by a local magazine, a small publication but respected in the city's cultural circles. When the article appeared, praising the vibrant new addition to the city's independent business scene, Sophia felt a vindication sweeter than any luxury Damien had provided. What she didn't expect was the photo accompanying the article. Her, surrounded by laughing children, her face alight with genuine joy, to find its way to Damien. Nor did she anticipate his reaction. "He's engaged," Vanessa, one of the few friends who had remained after the divorce, told her over coffee. "To Victoria Hartwell. You know, the pharmaceutical heiress? They're all over the society pages." Sophia nodded, surprised by her own lack of pain at the news. "I hope he's happy." "That's it? You hope he's happy?" Vanessa studied her face. "After everything?" "What else should I feel?" Sophia asked, genuinely curious. "Bitterness won't build my business. It won't help me move forward." What Vanessa didn't tell her, what Sophia would learn later, was how Damien had reacted upon seeing her photograph. How his new fiancée had commented on the article saying, "Isn't that your ex-wife, the bookstore owner?" How his expression had darkened as he stared at the image of Sophia, clearly thriving despite his predictions of her failure. That evening, as Sophia closed the shop and accepted Julian's invitation to dinner at a small Italian restaurant they had discovered together, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The simple pleasure of being valued for exactly who she was. "To new chapters," Julian said, raising his glass to hers. Sophia smiled, unaware that across town, Damien Richardson was planning a chapter of his own, one designed to remind her of everything she had walked away from, and everything he believed she could never truly have without him. The invitation's edge. The invitation arrived on a Thursday morning, an elegant cream envelope with gold embossing that seemed to mock the simple stack of bills beside it. Sophia recognized Damien's taste immediately, understated luxury that wasn't understated at all, but rather a deliberate display of refinement that demanded acknowledgement. Inside was a heavy cardstock invitation to celebrate the union of Damien Richardson and Victoria Hartwell at the Bellevue Estate, the most exclusive venue in the city. A handwritten note was paper-clipped to the corner. "Sophia, it would mean a great deal to have you there. For closure. D." She stood in her small kitchen, the morning light casting shadows across the invitation. Closure. The word seemed hollow, a polite fiction. In the year since their divorce, Damien had made no attempt at amicable communication. His occasional appearances in her orbit had been marked by cold politeness at best, thinly veiled contempt at worst. "He wants me there to prove a point," she said that evening to Julian as they walked through the botanical gardens where his latest project was taking shape. "To show me what I gave up." Julian considered this, his hand warm in hers. Their relationship had deepened gradually over the past 8 months, built on mutual respect and genuine affection, rather than the dazzling intensity that had characterized her early days with Damien. "The question is," Julian replied, "does it matter what he wants? Would going or not going be better for you?" It was the kind of question Damien would never have asked, one centered entirely on her needs rather than appearances or obligations. Sophia found herself smiling despite the turmoil the invitation had stirred. "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me wants to ignore it completely. Another part feels like not going means he still has power over my choices." The wedding was 3 weeks away, giving her time to consider. During that period, rumors about the event filtered through the city's social circles to Sophia. Victoria's dress was a custom creation from a famous European designer. The guest list included celebrities and political figures. The flowers alone had a budget that could have funded Phoenix Pages for a year. "You should see what he's doing," Vanessa insisted during a lunch break at the bookstore. "He's practically rebuilt the interior of Bellevue to Victoria's specifications. It's like he's trying to erase every trace of your wedding. Sophia shelved a stack of new arrivals considering this. That seems fitting, actually. Our marriage became about erasing who I was. Why should the wedding be any different? What Vanessa didn't say, what she couldn't know, was that Damien had personally overseen the guest list, insisting that several of Sophia's former friends be included. People who had chosen his social circle over her friendship after the divorce. People who would recognize the contrast between the simple ceremony she had once been content with and the extravaganza he was creating for Victoria. The decision crystallized for Sophia gradually. It came not in a moment of anger or defiance, but during a quiet Sunday afternoon at Julian's home. They were planting herbs in the small garden behind his craftsman bungalow, their hands in the soil, talking about everything and nothing. "I think I need to go," she said suddenly. "Not for him, for me. To close that door completely." Julian nodded, understanding without requiring further explanation. "Then I'll be there with you," he said simply. "If you want me to be." The offer touched her deeply. Julian wasn't proposing to accompany her as protection or as a statement, though his presence would be both, but because he recognized that facing Damien's world again might be difficult, and he wanted to support her choice either way. "Are you sure?" she asked. "It will be uncomfortable. Damien's friends can be cruel in very polite ways." Julian's smile was gentle. "Sophia, I design public spaces in neighborhoods where city councils fight me at every turn. I can handle a few passive-aggressive socialites." As the wedding date approached, Sophia found herself less concerned with Damien's reaction and more focused on her own response. She didn't want to attend out of bitterness or to prove something. She wanted to go as herself, the woman who had rebuilt her life on her own terms, who had found happiness that wasn't dependent on status or wealth. The night before the wedding, she stood in front of her closet, considering her options. Nothing felt right, either too plain and confirming what Damien's circle thought of her or too elaborate and suggesting she was trying too hard to compete. A text from Julian broke her indecision. "Wear something that makes you feel like yourself. That's who I fell in love with." The words "fell in love with" glowed on her screen. They had danced around the phrase, expressing their feelings in other ways, but seeing it written plainly filled her with a warmth that no luxury had ever provided. She replied with a simple heart, then reached for a dress she had purchased months ago but never worn, a deep teal silk that reminded her of the ocean near her parents' hometown in the Philippines. It wasn't the most expensive piece she owned, nor the most dramatic, but when she tried it on, she recognized herself in the mirror. That night, Sophia slept peacefully for the first time since receiving the invitation. Whatever game Damien was playing, she was no longer a piece on his board. She would attend his wedding not as the woman he had tried to reshape, nor as someone desperate to prove her worth, but simply as Sophia, a woman who had found the courage to value herself when he could not. The ballroom's whispers. The Bellevue estate glittered like a jewel against the evening sky, its stone facade illuminated by strategically placed lighting that enhanced its grandeur without crossing into ostentation. A line of luxury vehicles crawled along the circular driveway, depositing guests in designer formal wear who were greeted by white-gloved attendants. Sophia sat beside Julian in his modest hybrid car, watching the procession with a strange detachment. Once this world had been hers, or rather she had been an accessory to it, carefully selected to enhance Damien's image without overshadowing it. "Ready?" Julian asked, his hand finding hers in the dimness. She turned to him, taking in his simple, but impeccably tailored dark suit. The quiet confidence in his eyes, the lack of pretension that had first drawn her to him. "With you?" "Yes." They joined the flow of guests moving toward the grand entrance. Sophia felt the first ripple of recognition pass through the crowd. Subtle glances, whispered comments behind, discreet hands. She had expected this, had prepared herself for it, but the reality still sent a flicker of anxiety through her chest. Julian's hand at the small of her back steadied her. Not possessive, not controlling, just present, a reminder that she wasn't facing this alone. The ballroom took her breath away despite herself. Damien, or more likely Victoria's wedding planner, had transformed the already opulent space into something from a modern fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers reflected light onto walls draped in silk, creating an ethereal glow. Floral arrangements of white orchids and pale roses towered from every surface. A string quartet played softly from a raised platform. "Impressive," Julian murmured, though his tone suggested he found it perhaps a touch excessive. "Damien never does anything halfway," Sophia replied, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing server, "especially when he has something to prove." They had barely taken a few steps into the room when she heard the first direct acknowledgement of her presence. "Sophia Navarro, I didn't expect to see you here." Eleanor Blackwood, the wife of Damien's mentor and one of the women who had been most openly dismissive of Sophia during her marriage, stood before them in a black gown dripping with diamonds. "Eleanor," Sophia nodded politely. "Damien was kind enough to invite me. This is Julian Hayes." Eleanor's gaze flicked over Julian, her assessment almost comically transparent. The landscape architect's quiet confidence clearly confused her. He didn't have the aggressive status signals of the men in Damien's circle, yet he carried himself with an assurance that couldn't be dismissed. "How progressive of Damien," Eleanor finally said. "And how is that little shop of yours? Selling well, I hope?" Before the divorce, the condescension would have stung. Now, Sophia simply smiled. "Phoenix Pages is thriving, thank you. We just launched a literacy program for underserved communities that's received grant funding from the Cultural Foundation." The genuine accomplishment stated without defensiveness left Eleanor momentarily speechless. She recovered quickly, murmuring something about needing to greet other guests before disappearing into the crowd. "You handled that beautifully," Julian said, his eyes warm with admiration. "Practice," Sophia replied with a small laugh. "Years of practice." As they moved through the room, the pattern repeated. Former acquaintances expressing surprise at her presence, thinly veiled comments about her current life, and Sophia responding with a composure that gradually shifted the dynamic. She wasn't playing their game of subtle competition and social hierarchy. Her responses were genuine, her accomplishments stated as facts rather than defenses. Julian, for his part, charmed those who spoke with him. His passionate descriptions of creating accessible green spaces in urban environments, drawing genuine interest from guests tired of the same conversations about markets and acquisitions. It was an hour into the reception when Sophia finally saw Damien. He stood with Victoria, near the grand staircase receiving congratulations from a cluster of important-looking guests. Victoria was stunning in her couture gown, her blonde hair arranged in an elaborate updo adorned with what appeared to be actual diamonds. Sophia felt Julian tense slightly beside her as Damien's gaze swept the room and locked onto them. After a moment's hesitation, Damien whispered something to Victoria and began making his way toward them, his expression unreadable. "Sophia," he said when he reached them, his voice carrying just enough warmth to seem appropriate to onlookers. "You came. I'm pleased." "Congratulations, Damien," she replied evenly. "It's a beautiful celebration." His eyes moved to Julian, a flicker of something, surprise, perhaps disappointment, crossing his features before his social mask slipped back into place. "And you brought a guest." "Julian Hayes." Julian introduced himself, extending a hand that Damien had little choice but to shake. "Your venue choice is impressive. The original architecture is Beaux-Arts, isn't it? The restoration work is exceptional." The knowledgeable comment clearly wasn't what Damien had expected. He nodded, momentarily thrown off script. "Yes, Victoria," was quite insistent on the historical significance of the location. An awkward silence followed, broken when a server approached with a message that Victoria was looking for him. Damien seemed almost relieved by the interruption. "We should catch up properly, Sophia," he said, his tone suggesting this was unlikely to happen. "Enjoy the evening." As he walked away, Sophia felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The confrontation she had feared had been anticlimactic, almost mundane. Damien had seemed smaller somehow, less intimidating than the man who had once made her question her worth with a single raised eyebrow. The remainder of the evening unfolded more easily than she had anticipated. She and Julian danced, their movements naturally in sync. They enjoyed the exquisite food, admired the craftsmanship of the venue, and even found themselves engaged in a surprisingly pleasant conversation with a renowned architect who was interested in Julian's community-focused approach to design. It was during a moment alone when Julian had stepped away to get them fresh drinks that Damien approached her again. This time, his carefully maintained facade showed cracks around the edges. "You seem different," he said without preamble, his eyes scanning her as if trying to identify what had changed. Sophia met his gaze steadily. "I am different. Or perhaps I'm finally just myself." "And is that enough?" he asked, gesturing subtly to their surroundings. The opulence, the status, the world he had once offered her. "This could have been your life. All of this." The question was revealing in its assumption that she must surely regret walking away from material luxury. That happiness without wealth was inherently lesser. "Damien," she said gently without malice, "this was never my life. It was a role I was trying to play for you, and you're right. I have less now in some ways. A smaller home, fewer possessions. But I have something I never had with you." "And what's that?" he asked, a defensive edge creeping into his voice. "Peace," she answered simply. "The knowledge that I'm valued for who I am, not who someone wants me to be." She could see her words land like physical blows, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. Before he could respond, Julian returned with their drinks, his presence breaking the tension of the moment. "Victoria's looking for you," Julian said to Damien, his tone polite but firm. "Near the cake display." Damien hesitated, clearly wanting to say more, but the social demands of his own wedding pulled him away. As he walked off, Sophia noticed something she hadn't expected, a flash of genuine regret in his eyes. "Are you all right?" Julian asked quietly when they were alone. Sophia took his hand, feeling the calluses from his gardening work, so different from Damien's manicured smoothness. "I'm more than all right," she replied. "I'm free." Truth and reflection, the evening air carried the scent of night-blooming jasmine as Sophia and Julian left Bellevue Estate. Behind them the celebration continued, music and laughter spilling from the illuminated windows. Ahead, the city lights twinkled against the darkness, beckoning them home. "You were magnificent in there," Julian said as they walked toward his car, his voice filled with quiet admiration. "Though I don't think that's what Damien expected when he sent that invitation." Sophia laughed softly, the sound unburdened in a way it hadn't been in years. "I think he expected the woman he left behind, someone still defining herself by his standards, either trying desperately to meet them or angrily rejecting them. Instead, he found someone who had moved beyond them entirely," Julian observed, opening the car door for her. As they drove away from the estate, Sophia felt the last tendrils of her past with Damien loosening their hold. The encounter had provided something she hadn't realized she needed. Not closure in the sense of ending, but confirmation of her growth, her transformation into someone who no longer required his validation to know her worth. Inside the ballroom, a different scene was unfolding. Victoria, resplendent in her designer gown, had noticed Damien's distraction following his conversation with Sophia. His responses to guests became mechanical, his smile fixed, his gaze frequently drifting toward the exit where his ex-wife had disappeared. "Darling, is everything all right?" Victoria asked during a rare moment alone, her perfectly manicured hand on his arm. "You seem elsewhere." Damien blinked, forcing himself back to the present. "Of course, just taking it all in." He gestured to the opulent surroundings. The question hung between them, more perceptive than he had anticipated. What had he expected? for Sophia to appear diminished perhaps, envious of Victoria's beauty and status, regretful of her choice to leave his world. Instead, she had arrived, transformed, not by expensive treatments or designer clothing, but by something more fundamental. A certainty of self that he, for all his wealth and influence, suddenly realized he lacked. "It doesn't matter," he said finally, taking Victoria's hand. "Tonight is about us." But as they rejoined their guests, performing the perfect couple to perfection, Damien found himself increasingly hollow. The congratulations, the admiration, the deference that had once nourished his ego now felt oddly insubstantial. He had orchestrated this event partly to showcase his success post-Sophia, to prove that he had upgraded to someone who naturally belonged in his world. Yet the victory felt pyrrhic, tainted by the realization that Sophia had found something he couldn't buy. Across town, Sophia and Julian sat on the small balcony of her apartment, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the city below. Her simple home was the antithesis of Bellevue's grandeur, bookshelves overflowing with well-loved volumes, walls adorned with art from local creators, furniture chosen for comfort rather than status. "Do you ever miss it?" Julian asked, his question gentle, free from judgment. "The lifestyle, I mean." Sophia considered this honestly, appreciating that he cared enough to ask, secure enough to hear her answer. "Sometimes I miss the ease of it," she admitted, "not worrying about bills or business fluctuations. But I never miss the cost of that ease, the constant awareness that I was being evaluated, found wanting, and tolerated because of Damien's position." Julian nodded, understanding. "Worth and value are different things." "Exactly," she said, leaning against him. "Damien taught me what I was worth in his world, the price he was willing to pay to have me as an accessory. You showed me my value, simply by seeing me as I am and thinking that was enough." In the following days, news of Victoria and Damien's wedding dominated the society pages. Photographs captured their picture-perfect smiles, the exquisite details of the celebration, the illustrious guests. What the cameras couldn't capture was the quiet distance that had emerged between them, the seed of doubt planted in Damien's mind. 3 weeks after the wedding, as Sophia hosted a children's reading event at Phoenix Pages, Damien unexpectedly appeared at the back of the store. He stood awkwardly among the parents and children, his bespoke suit incongruous in the colorful, comfortable space she had created. When the reading ended and the children dispersed to explore the shelves, he approached her, his confidence notably diminished. "This is impressive," he said, gesturing to the thriving bookstore. "You've built something real here." Sophia smiled, genuinely pleased by the acknowledgement. "Thank you, Damien. Congratulations again on your marriage." He nodded, his gaze moving around the space, taking in the details. The reading nooks, the hand-painted murals, the carefully curated book displays. "I thought inviting you to the wedding would—" "I don't know what I thought. That seeing what you'd walked away from might make you regret your decision, perhaps." The admission was surprisingly honest, lacking the polished veneer that had characterized most of their interactions during and after their marriage. "And now?" she asked. Damien met her eyes, his expression unguarded for perhaps the first time since she had known him. "Now I wonder if I'm the one who should have regrets." Before she could respond, Julian emerged from the back room, carrying a fresh stack of children's books. His eyes registered surprise at Damien's presence, then understanding as he read the situation. "I should go," Damien said quickly, straightening his jacket. "I just wanted to see how you were doing." As he turned to leave, Sophia called after him softly, "Damien?" He paused, looking back. "I hope you find what you're looking for," she said sincerely. "Everyone deserves that chance." After he left, Julian approached, setting the books on the counter. "That looked intense." Sophia leaned into him, drawing strength from his steady presence. "I think he finally saw me, the real me, for the first time. And maybe himself too." That evening, as they walked through the community garden Julian had designed, a space where neighborhood residents of all backgrounds came together to grow food and connection, Sophia realized something profound. The golden cage of her marriage, had been replaced not just with freedom, but with purpose. The Phoenix hadn't merely escaped the flames. It had found its true flight path. "I love you," she told Julian under the garden's trellis of climbing roses. "Not for what you give me or how you make me look, but for how you help me see myself." His smile, warm and genuine, reflected the truth they had both discovered, that real love wasn't about possession or appearance or control. It was about recognition, acceptance, and the courage to let someone be exactly who they are. Miles away, in his impeccable penthouse overlooking the city, Damian Richardson stood at the window, a glass of scotch in his hand, Victoria's voice carrying from the other room, as she discussed renovation plans with their designer. He gazed at the distant lights, wondering if one of them illuminated a small bookstore, where a woman he had never truly known was living a life more authentic than anything his wealth could create. The reflection in the glass showed a man who had everything society valued and yet felt a hollow ache for what he had failed to recognize. That true worth couldn't be measured in acquisitions or appearances, and that some treasures, once lost, couldn't be reclaimed at any price.